Um, Today's topic is paint and color. So we're not going to focus so much on color theory or what constitutes good color schemes, although I'll share a few resources with you at the end. But rather we're going to discuss the relationship between paint and color in the realm of historic preservation. So more specifically, issues surrounding paint are preservation related, while issues regarding color selection are design related. And so undoubtedly the two are linked, but the issue of color, i.e. design, is often over-scrutinized in historic preservation, at least in my opinion. And that's what the title of this webinar is all about. Don't faint, it's just paint. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we delve into the topic, a few housekeeping duties to go over. Since we're utilizing the GoToWebinar interface, you should have a dashboard on your screen, and there are two options for you to listen in today. One is through the mic and speakers of your computer. The other is via a telephone, so just choose accordingly, and hopefully everything's working okay. You will also be able to ask me questions, and there are two ways of doing that as well. One is to type them into the question box at any time during the broadcast, and actually that's the preferred option. The other one is to, in a more traditional classroom manner, raise your hand, but I would prefer if you typed them in. That way we can stay on schedule, and I won't get distracted, which is very easy to do. So if you type your questions in, we'll just get to them at the end. Furthermore, the webinar is being recorded, so when it's over, you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the recorded session and also a link to a brief survey, and we would really appreciate any feedback on the content and as well as future topics that you think would be useful. So that's it for housekeeping. Now let's talk about paint and color. So first and foremost, paint is a preservation concern because its purpose is to seal the building surface from the elements and to prevent deterioration of materials from temperature and humidity extremes. So for already painted materials like this storefront that's made of cast iron and wood, painting or repainting is part of a maintenance cycle of this material. So it simply has to be done. It's something that once something's painted, we have to expect to paint it occasionally. Now the great thing is that paint provides also, in addition to the maintenance component, it also provides an opportunity to improve the design or aesthetics of the building. So if you couldn't tell, this is the same storefront but repainted. So we've addressed the maintenance concerns and we've also made it look better. So relatively speaking, paint is inexpensive. It's one of the cheapest materials that we can purchase for a building, but the results are also very dramatic. So coupled with the relatively low material cost and the double duty of material conservation and aesthetic improvements, paint provides a tremendous return on our investment. So you know, why not do it? So it really is an effective way of of killing two birds with one stone. However, not all surfaces should be painted, so paint isn't always necessary or appropriate. Generally, wall surfaces that have not been painted should remain unpainted, such as brick, terracotta, cast concrete block, stone, etc. On the flip side, soft porous brick that has been painted should remain painted because paint removal can damage those soft bricks. However, after we establish what should be painted or repainted or what should be left unpainted, the choice of color becomes a design consideration and not a preservation related one. And this is sort of this color versus paint is a point of departure between the worlds of design and preservation. Again, they're linked, but sometimes perhaps unnecessarily so. If you don't believe me, then another factoid regarding this, standards, the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation do not regulate paint color. So once again, they only are concerned with what should be painted, but not what color something should be painted. And there are obvious exceptions to this. For example, the White House would not be the same if it weren't in that particular color, or the Red Dome Inn, for example, and I just totally made that name up, may be historically significant, or the associations regarding the building may be regarding to the specific color of the dome, the red dome in this instance. And so if it were to be repainted in a different color, that has a direct impact on its historic significance. So those are exceptions, but generally speaking, the choice of color is really up to the owner. Now, there are several approaches to addressing color selection for historic buildings. Some building owners may prefer historic accurateness, while others want uniformity with adjacent structures. Others still do not mind their buildings being completely different from their neighbors and would like to employ non-traditional color schemes to call more attention to their businesses. And all of these approaches have historic precedents and can be valid depending on the building in question. These choices are also not mutually exclusive, so whatever the approach selected, it should not ignore good taste. There are 3 or 4 approaches that I'd like to mention today. Well, the first is the scientific approach, which is used for restoration projects and house museums. It is not the usual approach for Main Street commercial buildings. The scientific approach includes a detailed paint analysis of samples taken from a building. So paint layers are examined to determine which layers and colors were applied where and when. The other approach is called the historical approach, and it involves selecting colors from those that were available at the time of the building's construction and were considered appropriate for the age type and style of the building. And today, historic paint palettes are available from the major paint manufacturers like Sherwin-Williams, Benjamin Moore, and so on, making a selection of a quote-unquote appropriate color scheme very easy. The third approach is often called the Painted Lady approach, and it refers to the painted ladies of San Francisco. This approach allowed the use of any color in any combination that the owner desired. The Victorians thought that the color white on a house was in bad taste, so they painted their residences with many vibrant colors. And new technologies at the time allowed wider color ranges, so they took full advantage of it. And this is the approach that is recommended for Main Street or commercial designs. As long as the material has been painted previously, it is okay to paint it in any color. Now, don't misunderstand me or this approach as recommending a multitude of colors for every building. It simply means that whatever the color is chosen, it is selected based on a design principle and not on historic precedent or a scientific sample. So many features or facades can be painted in the Painted Lady approach or a simple monochromatic scheme. As an example, galvanized sheet steel cornices with lots of stamped ornamentation may seem to be very conducive to a multicolor scheme that accentuates each group of repeated motifs. However, when you take into consideration that the original intent of the material was to mimic the look of stone, a monochromatic approach also seems appropriate. So, in the end, there are numerous examples of both approaches used very effectively to achieve very different results. And here's a photo illustrating just that. Now, the derivative of the painted lady approach, or where it tends to fall apart, is the whatever you want approach, which is really dependent on taste. So the danger that we run into is when we utilize the historical approach or the scientific approach, we can fall back on facts and decisions made by others on color selection. When we go to the painted lady approach or the whatever you want approach, it's whatever you want. And this relies completely on taste, and some people simply don't have it. But I'd like to bring it back to preservation. So when buildings look great, we don't question the choice of colors. We just, we think that the colors are appropriate, but in reality, we think so because they look good. It's only when building or color schemes are bad that we try to use historic preservation to regulate design choices. And I think we need to look at the whole picture, so to speak, and realize that paint is a reversible change. So once again, as long as we're not painting previously unpainted surfaces, paint can be painted over. So it is subject to change. And so paint is one of the few things that truly allows for an individual expression of a building owner or a business, where historic preservation already gets a bad rep for over-regulating and requiring owners to keep certain features and those sorts of things, meeting the standards. All of those things I agree with. But the regulation of color, or unnecessary regulation of color, I disagree with. So in the end, if the only or the most pressing preservation battle in your town is a purple painted building like the one on the right, let me know what town you live in, and I may consider moving there, because that means that you really don't have a lot of preservation issues. So this is also whatever you want, but in good taste. So, and even though the example on the right has a multitude of colors, it works not because of the number of colors, but because of the placement. And that's what it's often about. It's not about the number, but the exact placement of colors. So like the building on the left only uses 2 shades of green, but the color is placed very effectively, and it's a nice, tasteful, and restrained color scheme on a building that could accept many more colors if the owner so desired. So less is always more, in my opinion, when it comes to color. One could always add more colors, but it's often less effective to reduce the number of colors after a building has already been painted. So I'd like to supplement the previous points with some additional considerations regarding color selection, and these apply particularly in commercial districts. So I will be probably excoriated by fellow architects and designers in attendance today, but I think that there's too much emphasis on context and districts and those kinds of things in color selection. I think we need to focus on just the building that we're painting and not so much on the adjacent buildings, at least to begin with. Sure, we can always verify that the building looks good with the neighbors, but let's first make sure that we pick the best color scheme for our building. And I offer 2 reasons for that. We can't assume that the adjacent buildings have good or appropriate color schemes. And if we base our decisions and try to harmonize with adjacent color schemes that are bad, that really takes away from the approach. So I would hate to sacrifice a choice of a particular color scheme because our neighbors have used something ineffectively. We also can't control that what the other buildings will look like. So we can't control how long the colors on these buildings will remain. And if we respond to them too much, what if they change? Then what? then we're stuck with an incompatible color scheme. However, if we always base it on our building, it will always look good on our building, on that building that we're working on. Now, the caveat to this is that perhaps the painting project involves several buildings, at which point that's your painting project and you do consider the adjacent properties and you develop a color scheme that works well as for this grouping of buildings. The other caveat or maybe consideration is that perhaps our color scheme can be the lasting or the scheme or the impetus for future improvement. So it may not harmonize exactly with what's going on to the left or right or across the street, but maybe it can spur the redevelopment or changes for the adjacent buildings, and maybe those buildings need to be repainted to match our building. So there's a lot of assumptions that we would be making by responding too much to adjacent properties. Okay, I'll shut up about that. The number one point is that we need to respond to the architecture of our building. Whatever approach we use to color selection, each has its merits, but selecting a color scheme that responds or accentuates the architectural details of our facade will typically yield the best results. Generally, buildings with more ornamentation can employ a multicolor scheme more effectively than a newer building whose modern appearance does not necessitate use of applied decoration. And again, this does not mean that selecting more colors is better. It's the placement of colors that has a much higher impact on the effectiveness of a color scheme than the number of colors used. So as long as the color scheme respects the architecture of the building, the results will be effective. So one thing that we can do is to figure out sort of a starting point when we select colors, whether it's the base color of the brick, what features or large areas of the building will not be painted, and those can be the beginning points for informing the rest of the decision making regarding colors. We should also give consideration to businesses that occupy the buildings. Color choices that impart the business identity onto the building may be entirely appropriate and recommended. Conversely, buildings with plenty of inherent color and ornamentation can serve as a clue to the graphic identity of the business. So it works both ways, and either solution can be appropriate. Whereas if we're inflexible and force color choices onto properties, these false forced choices will be immediately recognized. And this point of less is more, again, restraint versus exuberance. I think even buildings with ton of ornamentation tend to look better in restraint color schemes. And good taste and design quality can work in conjunction with historic appropriateness. So these decisions aren't all mutually exclusive. So here I just have a few photographs that I wanted to show to reinforce some of the points that we already mentioned. First, this importance of context. And I apologize that this picture doesn't really show the sides, the adjacent storefronts of this building, but I think it's still sufficient for our purposes. And the added complexity here is that this is all, these different color schemes are within the same building. And so first, let's assume that the brick above the parapet on this 1920s building was already painted. So we're not talking about a preservation concern here. We're strictly talking design. And so we see that these three bays of the building were all painted differently. Now, one could wonder why the parapet wasn't painted uniformly and then individual expression wasn't given to individual storefronts. I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that still reinforces my point in that we can't control these things, and just because we can't, we shouldn't sacrifice good choices for the sake of our neighbors necessarily. So the portions, the bays to the left or right of Weekend Kitchen are painted in white and gray and burgundy and gray. So if we were to harmonize with these buildings, Weekend Kitchen would be equally as boring. But in contrast, it is a beautifully painted storefront that stands out. But it's very effective. It works very well with the business. And so if we were to defer to the adjacent buildings, the results wouldn't have been as effective. Here I wanted to just quickly contrast historically appropriate color scheme on the left with a totally contemporary color scheme on the right. Now both storefronts utilize the same 19th century, late 19th century architectural vocabulary. The storefront on the right is newer, but it still has the tripartite composition, sort of historically derived bulkheads, large display windows, transom areas covered up, but it's utilized for signage. Whereas the storefront on the left is historic, is original, and it's painted in a 3-color scheme that accentuates the details. It's very tasteful. The other one is more exuberant, but totally appropriate as well, and it works well with the business. And they're both effective, and they're both have a place in our downtown commercial districts. Now, in this example, it's a before and after that I want to toggle back and forth, and I just wanted to demonstrate some of the decision making regarding colors. Maybe not so much specific colors, but what I'm really after is a way to simplify color decision making or color making decision. So in this particular project, and there's a lot of stuff going on, but how do you even begin to select a color scheme for this building or for this group of building with this multitude of storefronts? Well, let's figure out a starting point, and again, let's look at surfaces that can be exposed or left unpainted. So just a few points before we show the after. We'll assume that the owner wants to strip the upper brick of the facade and expose the original brick color. Alternatively, we will paint it in a brick red color. Number 2 is that we're going to reopen the windows. They're blocked. They're these large surfaces which will become voids of glass, but there's going to be trim that we're going to paint. And then the storefronts, the second from the left has a bulkhead of green structural glass that's painted, which we're also going to expose. So here's a color that we're going to see. And then the 2 Art Moderne storefronts on the right are from a material called soda stone, which has this natural tan color, which we're also going to expose. So there's the brick of the upper facade, the green of the vitrolite, these tan storefronts. All of those colors are going to play a role. Here's what we came up with. And so we have contrasting trim, window trim that highlights the historic sash. The storefronts, again, are exposed, and there aren't a lot of surfaces to be painted at the storefront level as a result, because the unpainted metal is for the display sash is left unpainted. Structural glass is exposed. Stone is exposed. Really, the only storefront components that we're painting is the storefront on the left, the doors, cast iron columns, and the lintel cornice. And we've also distinguished the one-story bay, or not one-story bay, one bay building on the left, which is part of a longer building that's off the picture. We distinguished it from our building because they were historically different, and so we wanted to have a slightly different color scheme. And actually, you could see that what the building on the far right used to look or is painted, in this sort of a salmon color with green window hoods, and should we have continued that color scheme and just painted our building in those yucky colors? I don't think so. So this, by the way, is just a rendering. It's not it's not an actual after photograph of the property, but we can just toggle back and forth between the two. So the other consideration or the other complaint I would hear from people regarding this kind of approach is that, well, nothing at the storefront level matches. And my response to that is, so what? The result, our recommendations, preserve the historic integrity of all of these storefronts. The result is much more interesting and much more appropriate, historically appropriate, and it tells a story of the evolution of this group of buildings rather than making all of these storefronts the same. And I know that's less of a color consideration, but even if we were to paint these storefronts all in the same colors, that would also have an impact on the historic integrity. This is authentic. Sameness is not. It never was the same on Main Street. So, all of this points to the design phase as being very important, because anybody can get a brush and slap some colors onto a building, but you have to make a lot of choices and revise your choices often in order for that color scheme to be effective. So if you don't have taste, consult with someone who does. I'm not implying that none of you have taste. I'm just saying there are people, architects, designers, whose job is to select colors, and it's important to consult with those people because they know what they're doing and they'll make your building look good. Now, if you insist on making some of these decisions yourself, and you should be well versed as a building owner or a business owner in color making choices, get a color wheel, and those are very inexpensive at a local Hobby Lobby art supply store. I think they cost like $1 or $2, and they will discuss all of these various relationships, and you can quickly, by rotating the color wheel, see what happens when you combine various colors with one another. Furthermore, you can obtain the already mentioned palettes from manufacturers which put together various color combinations, and those are both historic collections, but they also offer contemporary ones, and some of those are already very good color choices that are perfectly suitable, not just as a starting point but as a finished color scheme for our buildings. On top of that, there's digital software that one can either buy or utilize online from paint manufacturers, where you can colorize existing photographs of buildings or rooms, or you can import your own photograph and digitally paint it and then click various colors off and on and put together combinations to see what the building would look like, and that's a very effective design strategy. Now, once you finalize or nearly finalize your color choices, samples are very important. Paint chips are great, but the actual paint samples, mini tubes or cans of paint, are even more important. And I always recommend that people paint proportional sample boards, and by proportional I mean if you have a base color, that paint a larger area of that, and paint the trim color that will appear next to the base color on that same board. So proportionally paint the boards in the color occurrences as they will appear on the building, and then also place them in the various exposures that they're going to be utilized in. Colors look different in southern, eastern, western, and particularly northern exposures. So test them and to make sure that they look good in all of these exposures. And for example, if the main facade that you're painting, the prominent facade faces north, then that should be the how it looks in northern exposure should be the final decision-making criteria rather than how it looks in the southern. So always take into account the daylighting or artificial lighting if the building is going to be illuminated, how those colors will appear in the specific lighting source. There truly are no limits to great color choices and schemes, and they can come from anywhere. On this building in Kansas, this wonderfully rich and light color scheme may not be sort of what we would first gravitate to for this building, but it works very well. It's colorful, light, not historically inappropriate necessarily, but it's a rather colorful. But so what? It works. Again, it works very well, and it is appropriate to the architecture of the building. It does highlight some of the ornamentation in a wonderful manner. So, and the last thing to keep in mind that the eye, or the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and there are many solutions to the same problem. And so I would be happy with any of these color schemes, for example. And I think we need to have an open mind regarding color, and just because we don't like it doesn't mean that it needs to be changed. So, and again, once something's painted, it can be repainted over and over and over again. So that's sort of it for the design considerations. I quickly wanted to jump back into the preservation world and discuss some technical issues. This is just one slide because we don't have time for more. But preparation, surface preparation is everything prior to painting. So proper preparation of wood, metal, and masonry prior to repainting will maximize the longevity of the top coat. And you should always thoroughly remove dirt, mildew, and paint chalk with a mild detergent and a natural or nylon bristle brush, followed, if necessary, by a low-pressure wash with less than 400 psi at the surface. You can use chemical gel strippers and controlled scraping or sanding. And again, you want to use the gentlest means possible. And abrasive methods like sandblasting or high-pressure washes should never be undertaken on any material other than cast iron. The risk of damaging the historic fabric is just too great. You should prime bare surfaces with primers that are specifically formulated for the substrate. So oil-based primers for wood, specific primers for galvanized iron or steel, and so on and so forth. And then you should typically select the top coats from the same manufacturer that made your primer, at least whenever possible. That way, all of these paints are formulated to work to be most effective when used together in the primer top coat combo. Finally, when repainting, you should use the same paint type whenever possible. So if your previous top coat was oil, you should stick with oil. If it was latex, try to go with latex. Because the problems with switching are both ways. If oil paint is applied over latex, the peeling of the top coat can sometimes occur because upon aging, the oil paint becomes harder and less elastic than the latex paint. Conversely, if latex paint is applied over old chalking oil paint, peeling can also occur because the latex paint is unable to penetrate the chalky surface and adhere. However, if you're changing types, generally an oil-based primer will provide a good substrate for either top coat. So those are just some quick rules of thumb um, for preparation and technical painting considerations. A few resources before we finish that I wanted to share. Have a couple slides of those. The colorcharts.org is a great platform for cross-matching of colors for a variety of products. So let's say I have a tile of a particular color, and I wanted to figure out what's a good color match from Sherwin-Williams. This will tell me that. I also use it to go from find matching colors from different paint manufacturers. So let's say I have a Sherwin-Williams Rookwood Red and I want to know what a match from Benjamin Moore is. This website would also tell me that. And then I of course want to verify that with paint chips and samples, but this is a great starting point. The next resource, easyrgb.com, is good for people that develop schemes on a computer, and that's one of the methods that I do it in. Because the computer uses RGB calibration for its color display, those colors that you see on the screen never match print or commercial tints, anything that's physical. So you should always, that's why you always need to match it to actual paint samples. But here I can type in my RGB colors and it will tell me what a close match of a commercial tint is, and also vice versa. Let's say I have a particular paint that I wanted to use as inspiration. I first want to make sure that it looks good on a computer, or I can utilize it to develop other colors that go with it. I can convert it to RGB, and so it works both ways. An article that's available online with the same title as today's webinar, Don't Faint, It's Just Paint, the Mesker Brothers Galvanized Sheet Metal Edition. Here's the URL for that, and you don't have to read the article, but there are some good examples of color choices. A lot of painted ladies, if you like that approach. So you can peruse that. NPS Preservation Brief 10, it actually addresses paint failure problems on woodwork, but there's just a lot of good technical information that's there, so that's a good resource to utilize. And then the Sherwin-Williams Paint Color Visualizer, which is online. You can go to this URL, and again you can type or you can import photographs of your buildings or utilize other pre-existing photographs and alter colors and export the color schemes. It's a great tool to utilize. And then finally, my guilty pleasure, Adobe Cooler. And this is such a cheater's way of selecting color, but it's so effective. Adobe Cooler is also online, and the way it works is that you can go there and you can type in a color value in RGB, CMYK, Lab, Hacks, HSV, whatever, and then the software will output 4 other colors that are harmonious with your base color. And it does it based on a number of rules. So it develops analogous color schemes, monochromatic, triadic, complementary, compound, shades, and then a custom one. And you don't have to do 5, you can just do 2, but it's up to 5, no more than 5. And then you can export these colors again as RGB values. You can figure out what paint matches these colors. But the other thing that Cooler does, you can actually import a picture, and it will sample colors from that photograph and output these same 5 color schemes for you, and you can manipulate these in any way you wish. So these may not be the final color choices, and you still have to translate these color choices to paint, but it's more than adequate as a starting point, and the results, even the quick results from this software, are so very effective. So if you didn't know about Adobe Cooler, please check it out. It's a great thing. It's available online. You don't buy the software. Hopefully, maybe one day Adobe will sell it. But you can create an account and save your color schemes, and there's a community of people who post good color schemes, and anyway, great resource. So that's it for our content. Before I answer your questions, and there are a few, I wanted to give a quick plug for our upcoming webinars. On July 24th, Todd Tracy from An Alliance will examine the importance of diversifying youth entrepreneurial development programs so they remain fun and engaging. On August 21st, Todd and I will tag team, and we will explore the possibilities of connecting our historic downtowns with kids. So we'll discuss how to create exciting and valuable programs and environments. And then on September 18th, this is actually a rescheduled webinar. It was supposed to be held in August, but we're going to have it on September 18th. We'll explore the benefits and various types of storm window applications. And so we'll discuss window energy efficiency that actually pays for the investments and preserves the historic windows. Now, all of that information, as well as information about other upcoming webinars, registration info is available on our website at inalliance.biz/intraining. So that's it for the content, and I wanted to thank you for participating in today's webinar. And now I will look at the questions that we've had today. And let's see. We really just had one, looks like, which is the name. Someone wanted me to repeat the name of the stone above the glass block windows in the jeweler's example. It's called Kasota stone, K-A-S-O-T-A. Oh, and the Red Dome Inn actually is an actual building in Pittsfield, Illinois. Okay, so I didn't make that up. I wasn't as creative as I thought. Thank you, Steve. Well, I don't see any other questions. So, but if you do have any in the future, please don't hesitate to contact me. My contact info is on the screen. I hope you found this webinar useful, and I really will appreciate any feedback that you can provide after you get the survey link for the session. So once again, thank you for your time, and have a great day.